Hello, and welcome to the Global Innovation Race and the Future of AI Policy presented by CCIA. My name is Josh Rogin, and I'm Vice President for Federal Relations for CCIA. If there is one subject that has set Capitol Hill abuzz in 2023, it is artificial intelligence. And we are very excited to present two panels today where we can review what we have learned in 2023 on AI policy and discuss where lawmakers and the AI industry will be headed in 2024. We're going to go ahead and get started with our first panel entitled The View from Capitol Hill. And I am very excited to introduce a bipartisan and bicameral panel of amazing congressional staffers who work closely on AI. I am pleased to introduce Anderson Helton, who is a legislative assistant with Senator Wicker, Kate Johnson, staff director of the House Science Committee, Alan McGuinn with the Subcommittee on Research and Technology, and Zach Atran, who is a legislative assistant for Representative Ted Lieu. Let me also just note that these staffers are speaking for themselves today, and their remarks do not necessarily represent the views of their members or committees. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll start with this, and thanks again for everyone for joining me today from Capitol Hill. Leader Schumer has engaged in a very deliberate and bipartisan fact-gathering process, and there's a lot of bills being introduced on AI. As we all know, this Congress has struggled to pay its bills and pass anything of consequence. So is AI different? And when is the soonest Congress might come together and pass a comprehensive bipartisan AI regulation? I'm going to start with you, Kate. Why don't you take that one?
Thank you for an easy one to lead off with, Josh. First off, I just want to say I'm the staff director of the Research and Tech Subcommittee. I'm not the full committee staff director, so just want to clarify that. But we on the Science Committee have held two hearings focused on what are the necessary research needed and tools needed to offer good governance of AI. I think we are looking to move some focused pieces of legislation, hopefully in this next session of Congress, focused on AI that are narrow to the Science Committee's jurisdiction. So they're non-regulatory, but really looking at the research standards and best practices that are needed to inform good governance of AI. I think, in all honesty, I think that this year, this Congress, it's going to be really difficult to do a massive AI bill that's focused on touching every corner. Both committees need to get up to speed and have the time to really examine these challenges. And B, I think it's just a challenge in the environment that we're in this Congress.
Yeah, no doubt. Passing anything large and consequential, it takes a lot of time in this town. Zach, I'm curious if you agree, and maybe touching on, whether you think we need to go in a comprehensive fashion or a kind of a sector by sector or discrete issues.
Yeah, it's an important question. First, thanks, Josh, for having us. So I would say that there's some reason for optimism. I would also agree with much of what Keith said, which is that we have a lot of other parties, I think, in Congress right now. So I think when we return back from the holidays, government funding is going to be the top priority, and AI is not going to be. There's not going to be some comprehensive AI package that's going to happen before that. Having said that, though, I will say that both on the House and Senate side, there's definitely been reason for optimism. One, in terms of the interest that members have had in it, and then two, in how bipartisan it's been. He was mentioning some of the things that SST has done, and one of the things that I've been struck with is in the Science Committee, in some of the AI Insight forums that Leader Schumer has had, some of the events that my boss, Congressman Lieu, has had. It's sometimes hard to tell who's the Republican, who's the Democrat when they're asking certain questions regarding AI. And I think that does show a level of interest among policymakers, but also really a bipartisan desire to develop some sort of consensus. I think it remains to be seen what timeline there is for that. But I think right now Congress is certainly prioritizing getting up to speed. So you mentioned the Senate AI Insight forums, which I think have been helpful on the Senate side. On the House side, what my boss has been doing, he's actually, as a vice chair, he's been doing these vice chair AI briefings with members of Congress where he's brought in these civil rights leaders, civil liberties leaders. He actually did one with Speaker Johnson when Speaker Johnson was vice chair. So they had this bipartisan vice chair dinner with Sam Altman from OpenAI. And it was a really long conversation with lawmakers from both parties. So there's definitely a strong level of interest there. But I think it does remain to be seen whether that's going to lead to some sort of comprehensive legislation down the road this Congress.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I've seen a lot of the same thing of the bipartisan cooperation. Most of the bills on AI are bipartisan and usually by members that don't work on other issues together. So I think that's really exciting. Anderson, let me come to you, and I'd love your thoughts on whether, from your Senate perch, whether you think comprehensive or sector by sectors the better path or the more likely path, and then I'm going to just complicate it a little more. Everyone's talking about AI, and that's the exciting topic. But Congress has been wrestling with a federal privacy law, and it still hasn't gotten that job done. In fact, I still don't think we have a bill in either chamber that we can look at. AI legislation will not be very effective if we don't have baseline federal privacy law too. So do you think there's a chance that those two issues can go together? And just love your thought on comprehensive or sector by sector.
Yeah, so go ahead and start off. The comprehensive is what people want to tackle right now. Sector by sector, we could probably peel off and take some little wins. I think we're starting to see that with the privacy battle, like you mentioned, where instead of focusing on comprehensive, people are starting to lean more towards a kid's privacy focus and then move on to something larger. I would argue that comprehensive is probably the best pathway forward. But if you took a model where agencies are still allowed to enforce current laws on the books with some guidance from a federal standard, I think that's probably the best approach. But you're absolutely right that we still lack a data privacy federal law, and you're certainly correct where we're speculating right now with what happens when we don't have a federal AI legislation, but we're experiencing what happens when you don't have a federal data privacy standard. So it's we're already in it. I would say that data is the oil that's fueling AI, and a lot of the issues that people are currently talking about within AI could definitely be solved in a federal data privacy standard. When we talk about transparency and what we don't know about AI, well, a lot of that could be tackled in a privacy standard. But I'm not going to speculate as to whether they could move hand in hand, but it certainly doesn't make sense for AI to move without there being a data privacy standard in place. And so if it's a hand in hand or 1 week apart, I'll take either one we can get. But I would love to see a data privacy standard go before AI. I don't know how you would get the results you want out of an AI legislation without federal data privacy standards.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I agree with you on that. And one other thing to just think about versus the sector by sector versus comprehensive is it's just so hard to pass anything that if you're doing it sector by sector, you may be bogged down in a lot of small fights versus one big fight. And so, yeah, so it's definitely complicated. Alan, I wanted to bring you into the discussion. I know the Science Committee has been looking at AI for a while, and something we don't hear enough about is workforce development. Suddenly we need to fill thousands of AI technical jobs, oversight jobs, government positions. Can you talk about this challenge and how we best meet it?
Yeah, Certainly, and I do appreciate the question. I think this is something we've been thinking about for a long time. Our committee led in the development of the National AI Initiative Act, which had a workforce, the AI workforce as a core component of that for both NIST, NSF, and DOE, training up the workforce that will be required. And I do think that your question gets at the heart of meaningful governance in this space, especially as we're looking at the AI risk workforce. If we're to establish a federal standard for AI, or even across sectors, or even within the regulators of those sectors who are looking at it, say in transportation or the FCC, we need to have people that can implement either regulations or standards. And right now, unlike in cybersecurity or in privacy, the jobs, the skills, they're less mature for artificial intelligence. We didn't have AI careers until a few years ago, and I think it's similar in the standards space where it's less developed.
Great. Kate, do you want to add anything with your work on the committee?
I'll just say I think that this is a priority for the committee on both sides of the aisle. We're planning to look at that and see how we can reinforce and support the ability to recruit this workforce, both within the federal government, but even for industry. I was just writing a note down for myself. The question of what is the definition of an AI job at different levels. NIST played a role in doing that for cyber, and I think we're going to need to look to see how we can do some of those definitions so that they're utilized and consistent across both industry and government, looking forward to the future. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the first workforce you guys had to train was your own members. And I'm just curious, and Zach, I know your boss has been doing a lot of these forums. How has the learning gone with, you have members coming in that some are lawyers, some are, have totally different jobs, have nothing to do with AI. I'm just curious about the appetite of members to learn and how that process has been going. And yeah, Kate, we can start with you on that.
Yeah, so our members are eager to dive into this topic, to get up to speed. We have had, as I mentioned, 2 hearings, one at the full committee and one at the subcommittee level. But in addition to that, we've held a number of small member breakfasts with AI experts. So it was off the record. So they're able to come in and ask questions without worried about making a soundbite. Really get a discussion going on a bipartisan basis. I think back to Zach's point, most of these discussions are very bipartisan and members aren't that far apart. And the questions that they have and the interest that they have of where we should be looking, as well as Speaker McCarthy had held a number of conference events that members participated in. And Senator Schumer has allowed staff on the House side to also attend some of the AI Insight forums, which have been very interesting and informative. But I would really give the AI caucus a lot of credit for the educational outreach that they've done as well, both at the staff and the member level on the topic.
That's great. And Zach, you're seeing interest from members beyond, just on the Science Committee or on the Judiciary Committee, E&C. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I think the interesting thing about AI specifically is just how it loops together so many other issues that members care about. And I think one of the things that my boss thinks about as vice chair is that it's not just sort of the usual sort of tech-specific interest from lawmakers. My boss likes to say a lot. He's a recovering computer science major, and you have, of course, people with technical backgrounds that are going to be interested in this. What's been interesting too is that members with backgrounds who care a lot about civil liberties, who care a lot about workforce issues, labor issues, whatever it may be, AI is really sort of the next frontier for them to really think about how they can work on legislation to benefit folks, and how AI is going to really sort of delve into and affect these policy areas that they've been working on in many cases for years and for decades. And so I think what we've seen in the Senate AI Insight forums that Leader Schumer has had, the vice chair events that my boss has been doing, including he's done them in the past on a bipartisan basis. I think what we've seen is a lot of interest from members where it's not just focused specifically on just sort of the technical aspects of AI or sort of AI in general, but specifically, members coming and saying, I really care about civil liberties, or I really care about sort of workforce issues. I really want to sort of delve into how AI is going to affect this and how I, as a member of Congress, can really stay on top of this issue. So I think just because AI is touching so many different sectors, it speaks to how large of an incentive there is for lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, but also from different committees who work on different issues, who specialize in different issues, to really get involved in the issue.
Yeah, no, I think if it can bring Republicans and Democrats together, perhaps AI really is a miracle technology. And I wanted to ask a question that I'd love to hear from all four of you. And Anderson, I'll start with you. You know, so the relationship between the United States and China and the technological race between the two countries, I feel like is animating a lot of AI policy on the Hill. And I'm just curious, Anderson, we'll start with you. How do you think China's efforts and our competition with China, if you want to call it that, how does that affect how we regulate AI in this country?
Well, from a national security lens, we always say in this office, I get the SASH ranking member as my boss. So we want to be the first, the fastest, the best. But we've lost the first mover advantage to China already. They have AI regulations in place, and so we're sliding behind there. But I think where China can compete is our ability to innovate quickly, and our ability to allow small businesses to become very big businesses. What seems like overnight. I mean, nobody had heard of OpenAI in 2017, and in the course of 6 years, they took a tool and made it the number one topic in America. It seems like. I think that's where our advantage comes from. Is we have this entire ecosystem, and these guys can innovate so quickly. And as long as we don't stand in their way, and we can give them a steady set of rules to play by, they can keep us number one and leading this effort. And I think that's where we get our leadership capabilities in the tech industry, is these companies that are doing such great work. And they don't need a government coming in, and that's how we should be thinking about this with China. Is we have such a great advantage. All we have to do is just not get in the way. We don't want to be the government that comes in and tries to fix an issue that's not there. We just need to give these guys a set of standards that can still bolster us, but not hold them back.
Gotcha. Alan, what would you say about China and AI?
Sure. Sure. So I have 2 points. Again, coming from the science committee, I think my first point is we should be funding our science, our R&D, our standards work at the level set out in the Bipartisanship and Science Act that we did last year. As many people, as your listeners may know, there are differences between authorizations of appropriations and actual appropriations, the actual funding. If we look at the National AI Initiative Act, those programs are authorized at levels significantly higher than where they actually received funding, and we're seeing the same happen with the CHIPS and Science Act. So if we're to remain competitive with the U.S., we should actually fund the and science part of CHIPS and Science, which is intended to make our country remain competitive with China and our other adversaries. The other point I'll make, and this is something that came up in our AI hearing in June, where one of our witnesses, Dr. Ruman Chowdhury, said, brakes help cars drive faster. Regulation in and of itself, or governance in and of itself, is not a barrier to innovation. We just got to get it right. And I hope that through all of the conversations we're having with stakeholders like CCIA or academics or other groups, Congress is able to coalesce around how to get those questions of governance correct.
Great. And Kate, what would you say about how you think about China when you're thinking about AI regulations?
Yeah, I think to Anderson's point and somewhat to Alan's, I think we need to look at we can take lessons from China of how they're choosing to invest in innovation and R&D, but I also think from a regulatory point of view, China isn't really where we want to look, or take lessons from what we shouldn't do, given a lot of China's regulation is going to stifle people's access to these tools, which in effect could stifle innovation. And so I think, to Alan's point, if we're looking for good governance, we should be looking to our allies, what lessons learned from that, and how we can balance innovation with any governance that we're looking to do.
Great. And Zach, I'm going to give you the last word on this question. I'd also be curious about how often China is coming up for questions by members. Is it really kind of in the bloodstream up there when we talk about AI?
Yeah, so I would say that China is coming up quite a lot within member level conversations and staff level conversations. I think there are a couple parts to it. One is just from the competition lens. This is what is China doing? What's happening in sort of China's AI innovation space? How is it comparing to America? The other part of it, of course, is China's regulations and what they look like and really what's driving those regulations. So I think there's a lot of interest, and there's certainly been some briefings I've attended that have been specifically focused on China and AI. I would say, I mean, Kate also mentioned sort of focusing on what our allies are doing too. And I would mention that another, I think, really key aspect that my boss has been thinking about, that other members I think have been talking about, is the EU with the EU AI Act. So the risk-based approach that they've been doing, I think, has caught the attention of a lot of folks in the US, where we're trying to figure out sort of what is the best way to promote our values, while also encouraging and incentivizing innovation and not having regulations necessarily be a barrier to that. So really being able to understand sort of the different categories that the EU has put forward and the next steps that they've taken and how frontier models are sort of factoring into those negotiations. I think all of that has also been interesting to lawmakers and staff as well.
Yeah, I know the EU likes to move very fast on their regulations, but even they are coming in to some conflict about how to regulate. So there's going to be thousands of small decisions in any eventual AI legislation, but one kind of basic decision is, do we need a standalone AI agency, or is it smarter to put AI experts in every agency, and the special, in the some specialize in healthcare AI, some in finance AI. I'm just curious about how you guys are thinking about that. Alan, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So again, from the non-regulatory lens, I think from the lessons that we've learned from guidance and standards that have already started to be created, I think the NIST AI RMF is a good guide for that. And what I mean is AI and governance in AI is highly contextual. It'll change based on what use case is being done, how the AI is deployed, what sector it is in. And because of that, you need the people that know those sectors to be at the table when you're creating rules or governance for any individual AI implementation. This has led NIST to create the broad framework, but also to say, hey, we need risk profiles for different sectors and use cases, and we need those to help advance standards in those spaces. I think that is a good model to think about, maybe with an expert agency to help other sector-specific folks or use case-specific folks to understand governance in their individual implementation.
Gotcha. Anderson, any thoughts on the single agency or kind of spread throughout?
I'm a big supporter of having experts within individual agencies as opposed to creating one kind of one-stop shop for AI. Similar to Alan's point, when you talk about how we're going to be regulating use cases, and then how that'll look different for every other industry that is using AI. You're going to find some different specialties that are needed with those AI experts. And I'm also just not big on creating new agencies, which can, you can get into a fight with the interagency coordination. as we look to regulate certain sectors and things like that. I think that having an expert just makes sense. We already have information officers in most agencies, and they can grow that skill set with by adding staff. And as we get more people to fill these AI jobs, that can be one of them. They can come onto the regulatory side. So
great.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time for this panel, but I want to give each of you an opportunity. We touched on a lot of different issues today, but is there something we haven't mentioned that you're thinking about, or folks should be thinking about when they're thinking about AI regulation? Alan, why don't we go to you first?
I'll be really quick. We've seen some really positive developments, like with the AI EO, to help develop the standards and workforce that'll be needed to implement them. But there are significant resource constraints, as I talked about earlier, especially for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is funded under significantly under what was authorized for the AI portfolio, and it has a number of other major issues with funding. So I think that as Congress looks forward, we should try to properly resource our agencies who will be doing a lot of this work.
Great. And Kate, what are we not thinking about that we should be thinking about?
I think we had a pretty robust discussion this morning, but I think I'll go back to my first point, which is even within the executive, the EO, the AI EO that came out, there's a number of governance protocols that are put in there, but not the tools to carry them out. And so we need to invest in good research and have these governance structures set in informed findings. And so we need to support that work at our agencies.
Great. And Anderson, what would you say?
I would just emphasize the importance of the incremental approach here as we look to keep our industry strong. I would say the EO is almost everything in the fridge kind of deal, and I would like for a more incremental steps be taken where people can adjust to how the regulatory framework's actually going to shake out.
Great. And Zach, I'm going to give you the last word.
So I'll actually relate this back to the previous question, Josh, about the notion of an agency, just because it's been a question my boss has been thinking about a lot. A lot of members have been thinking about it too, right? And I think the key question, I think, for members, for folks to really be thinking about is we already have agencies that have expertise in these different fields that have been focused on AI. So the FDA now has a serious track record of looking at AI in medical devices. DOJ and HUD have said that the Fair Housing Act applies to algorithms. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says that financial institutions, when they deny applications for credit, have to provide explanations regardless of whether or not an algorithm was used. So I think the key question for us to really ask is, what is the specific use case that a new agency or new government entity is going to really have? What advantage would it have where other agencies might not really be as effective in sort of some of these sector-specific regulations? I think that's a question that deserves to be looked at. We've introduced legislation to look into that further, but I think that's a really important question for us to answer.
Great. Well, I want to thank again Anderson and Kate and Alan and Zach. And, I wouldn't have known who was a Republican, who was a Democrat on this call, just like you said, Zach, with the members. So that gives me a lot of hope. And I just want to thank you guys for your time and for your work on the Hill, really wrestling with these really important issues. So thanks for joining us, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.